All right, we need to talk about Huey. I'm going to give you some thoughts, the good, the bad, and the ugly when it comes to this boss. Before we get into the negative, we're going to start with the good stuff because there is a lot of good stuff and it is overshadowed by the bad stuff, but the old school team did deliver in some really cool ways. Let's start off with the art design. Huey itself looks really awesome. I love the Aztec vibe. All of Varlamore's got that very similar vibe, and it's really cool to see that every time they introduce a new boss, it fits into that world. It's like Varlamore has been separated for so long that everything there looks unique. Nothing looks like the rest of Gielinor. The atmosphere, the area, the mountain itself, I think is really awesome. Not necessarily for the boss fight. Obviously, people have complained that the mountain you're not really traversing up the mountain, but I'm just talking about in general the mountain. The idea that you're working your way up to the base camp and then working to the summit from there. It feels awesome, and the music is really good as well. The loot is always a talking point, but the loot is always something, whether it's good or bad, and in this case it started off bad and they're improving it. It's so easy to change and tweak that I don't think it's worth the time to talk about. In terms of the boss fight, one of the mechanics I think is really interesting are the pillars. Being able to charge those pillars to get bonus damage, I think is an interesting mechanic. In terms of fighting it in a group, I think it feels really good in a group of about 3 to 6 people. It just feels balanced. If you're doing it in that group size, you'll probably get the best experiences. And then lastly, this is something that I was very, very happy with, the grouping system. Being able to put your name in, get people in, and have this private kind of base camp. It kind of reminds me of something like Monster Hunter, where you're kind of going on an expedition. It's just really nice that they were able to incorporate something where you can set it up and just do some Huey with the boys. Huey with the boys. We got the good out of the way, now it's time to talk about the bad. First thing is the first half of the fight, the part where you're attacking the tail and the different holes in the wall. It is very uneventful. The only thing you're doing is dodging the lightning that shows up once in a while, which is already a mechanic later in the fight, and then protecting against a prayer, which again is another mechanic later in the fight. You're just attacking a sand crab in the wall, is what it feels like. There's nothing to it. There's no variance between fights either. 5 different sand crabs, get them to 0, and move on. They could have made it more unique and more varied. They could have made it so that maybe certain caves you can attack. It's like random which ones the tail is in. Or they could have made it so that, yeah, you can attack everyone, but maybe there's like critical points you can attack and there's like, it changes the order every time. Give a little bit of variance perhaps. I know maybe in a group you kind of want to keep people scattered. But I don't know. I feel like there's stuff you could have done to make it more eventful. The lightning mechanic, the one where it spawns on the tile you're on and then a bunch of random tiles in the arena. We have seen a lot of this recently where it's just spawning random circles in the arena and you had to find a save tile. We've seen it with this boss. We've seen it with Blood Moon. We've seen it with the Amoxie boss, Scurious. I guess because it's mid-game, they feel like this is a mechanic they have to put everywhere, but it's the exact same mechanic reskinned every single time. You could still teach players how to move from bad tiles, but make the boss have a unique feel. This boss is a giant storm dragon, right? So if you're going to have these lightning projectiles or lightning tiles that you can't stand on, maybe it's a lightning strike or something where it's kind of like, maybe it's like every other row or a certain section or whatever that you need to stay away from. Or maybe it's like a hurricane where you have to get away from the hurricane, or you stand in the middle of the hurricane because it's the eye and it's safer. There's ways of doing this mechanic while making it unique. The last thing I want to talk about in this category specifically, the bad, is group sizes. Group sizes for 20, it's very similar to Next. It's okay for learners if you have no one to go with, but you don't stick around there for long, that's for sure. Solos and duos are not effective at all. Reason being is you cannot charge the pillars. The pillars get charged from protection prayers. When they're fully charged, you need to have all 3 protection prayers basically active by at least 3 different players at a given time. When they're fully charged, you get a huge damage boost. In a solo or a duo, you can't do this because every time you switch off a prayer, the other pillar goes down immediately. Now, they said that they wanted this boss to be soloable, but it was going to be much easier in a group. And man, did they deliver on that, because it is because of this pillar, it is so much easier in a group of 3 than it is in a solo. Now, you could have made it better and more optimal in a group of 3 while still making solo bearable, okay? You could have made it so that the decay on the pillars have a delay. You could have given them a delay of a couple ticks, for instance. That would have made it so that a solo player, for example, could alternate between all 3 protections while protecting against a projectile coming down, and that would actually charge the pillar slowly because they're switching back to the other one before the decay delay stops. That would have been really cool. That would have been a cool way to make it a solo encounter that's a little bit more sweaty, while making 3 people plus more optimal because it's a lot more chill and you don't have to worry about that. And now it's time to talk about the ugly, the things that I am most passionate about. First one I want to talk about is the one mechanic we really haven't talked about, and that is the Shockwave mechanic. The tail will do an attack from the cave at the second part of the fight, and you have to, deal with that triangle Shockwave coming your way. It seems like the intended mechanic is for you to run through it. Why is this the intended mechanic? I feel like we're missing something. There has to be something we're missing. You would never design a boss so that you were intended to run through the damage source. That is not intuitive at all. Now, in old school, we've seen this before, right? We know Ohm Lightning, you can run through it. We know Wardens, you can skull skip and avoid the slam damage by running through it. We know you can run over like poison splats on the ground. Yeah, that's all there, but there's a very big difference. Those were not designed that way. They were emergent gameplay. Emergent gameplay is when something is designed one way and players figure out a way to circumvent it or change it or alter it. Ohm Lightning was designed in a way so that certain columns were not safe to be on and you need to find a safe column. Warden's P3, you're supposed to do the skulls in one tick, right? And not take slam damage at all. This boss, they created this Shockwave that doesn't seem to have any way to dodge it other than to run through it. And that to me is a very poor decision if that's true. Please, somebody find something hidden with this. We shouldn't be teaching players that that's what we're supposed to do. That is what we're trying to do with this emergent gameplay is we're kind of like essentially bug abusing or the engine, right? The thing that the running in the game only thinks you're on every other tile. You're not supposed to design it as a mechanic. So like this should have some way to dodge it that's actually visual and real. And if players still use running through it as an emergent form, that's totally fine. But give us an actual mechanic here, please. The next thing I want to talk about is the fact that the fight is melee only. There is not a problem with a fight being melee only, okay? We've seen it with Araxor, it was melee only, for example, right? The problem with this fight is that you use 20% of the arena because it's melee only, right? You got this whole middle part of the top you don't touch, okay, other than running through it because all you do is melee, okay? There are big arenas that you only melee in, right? Like Verzik, right? You only melee Verzik. But that's very different because Verzik moves around and there's mechanics that make you move around as well, like crabs and yellows. This fight, the boss doesn't move. The boss is in the wall, okay? There is a front row at the wall. There is a little half square at the tails, and that's it. You are using you could mark those tiles and be like, these are the tiles I'm using, and that's it. Why is that the case? Why is the arena looking like this? You should be using different attack styles so you can use different parts of the room. I know it's mid-game content, but mid-game players can switch styles or even just camp range if it was at least somewhat viable. It also just, when you have 20 people in there and you're all in the front row, it feels horrible. When you're in a small group, because the lightning mechanic always spawns on your feet, you always like mess up the rows in front of you and you got to find like a better row. It feels bad. I would prefer if this fight had different styles used. And I'm going to talk about that in this next point with the tail. The tail is the third ugly thing I want to talk about, specifically the shielded tail. This tail, you only deal a certain damage out. I think like a hit of 9 on it max. So you want to use like fast double weapons like dual mox or whatever. That's all fine, but it feels bad. It doesn't feel good. I looked at that tail and I said there has to be a way to penetrate the shield, right? With Verzik, it's the exact same thing as Verzik. Exact same thing as Verzik, but with Verzik, we have Dawnbringer, right? So we use Dawnbringer, we take turns using it, and we bring down the shield a lot quicker, right? I tried to figure out what a hidden mechanic could be here. You could try all the bolt activations. The big thing I tried to try is earth spells. This boss is weak to earth by 60%, but there is no way you would ever use it because it doesn't work anywhere. What they could have done is, just like Ice Demon, for example, or Verzik with Dawnbringer, you could have made the earth spells penetrate through the shield. Okay, that would have been really cool. You could have brought a mage switch, switched it for the tail, and then go back to the boss. But instead, we're left with this weird, just melee it with dual mocks and that's it. On top of using earth spells, that would have actually made the Dragon Hunter wand a best in slot use, okay? Because it would be better than Shadow, and you'd be casting earth spells with the weapon that does best against dragons and things with elemental weaknesses. It's such a unique opportunity, and old school, they do this sometimes where they release items that they have a best in slot use at the boss they come from, like TOB with Scythe, or even with Sank. It would have been awesome, because then we'd actually have one use for this thing outside of like Steel Dragons on a mid game, right? That would actually be effective. Please, this is something they could easily change, right? So if they can change this, we would feel really good. I'm hoping that they look deeper into this boss and give it some different mechanics or alter some of the mechanics, and that we can all get ready to do some Huey with the boys.
Saddled up, boys gathered around. Heard tell of Huey that Aztec dragon found. High up on the mountain we're poised to roam. We're fixing to take him down, back to our Gillinor home. Riding high, Huey with the boys. Bottles of brew in our hands, dragging bait toys. We're taking on the beast with magic, rage, and might. Huey with the boys, gonna make it right. Wars guided us up through treacherous terrain. Our gear shine ready for the dragon's aim. Through treacherous paths we made our stand. United we fought, hand in hand, riding high. Huey with the boys, bottles of brew in our hands, dragging bait toys. We're taking on the beast with magic, rage, and might. Huey with the boys, gonna make it right. Tome of earth, so the pages unfold. Huey's wand and high, treasures to hold. Crafting restoration pots, our next goal in sight. Baltimore's heroes rise in the morning light. Riding high, Huey with the boys. Bottles of brew in our hands, dragging bait toys. We're taking on the beast with magic, rage, and might. Huey with the boys, gonna make it right. Now our names are known in Baltimore land. Huey's fought by our brave boy band. We rode together, united we stand.